Tonight, we want to take up space for the cultural icon, the human rights activist, the hero to so many of us, Mr. Harry Belafonte. Mr. Belafonte's publicist says the 96-year-old died of congestive heart failure on Tuesday morning. And we want to spend much of our time today talking about him. And first, Stephanie Elam helps us by taking a look back at his life and his legacy.
The Banana Boat song opening line, Deo, put Harlem-born Harry Belafonte on the map. The son of Caribbean immigrants worked hard to pull himself out of poverty through music and education.
I and my brothers and sisters were the first to be educated.
Belafonte's humble and sometimes rough beginnings in New York City helped shape the man who later would have a major impact on American music and drama.
I went to school here, drama school. My classmates were Marlon Brando, Sidney Poitier, Walter Matthau, B. Arthur.
Belafonte burst onto the entertainment scene in the early 1950s. He was dubbed the King of Calypso because of the Jamaican folk music he made popular.
Cut that out.
At around the same time, he won rave reviews for his role in the movie Carmen Jones. It was one of the first films with an all-black cast to garner box office success. The man with the uniquely husky voice went on to make more than 40 albums, including original recordings and compilations, and starred in more than 10 movies spanning more than 5 decades. Belafonte won several Grammy Awards for his records in the early 1960s and was one of the first black performers to win a Tony Award for the Broadway hit John Murray Anderson's Almanac. In his later years, his big screen projects dealt with the larger societal issues of race and class, like 1995's White Man Burden.
Kind of just grew up and got away from me, you know.
Although Belafonte's career kept him busy, he always made time for his family. He was the father of 4 children from 2 marriages. His daughter, Sherry Belafonte, followed in his footsteps to become an actress in her own right. Although his music and movies gained him fame, Belafonte also made his mark as a political activist. In the 60s, he stood up for the civil rights of blacks in America and stood side by side with the likes of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Bobby Kennedy, both later assassinated. 2 decades later, he turned his attention to the poor and powerless abroad, especially in Africa. In 1985, Belafonte initiated the U.S. for Africa recording of We Are the World with some of the world's most famous entertainers. The song raised over $63 million for African relief. And for his humanitarianism, the artist received numerous awards from the Kennedy Center, the ACLU, the American National Medal of the Arts, and the Thurgood Marshall Lifetime Achievement Award.
Mr. Harry Belafonte.
Later in life, Belafonte further sealed his legacy, starting his own foundation, Sankofa, focused on social justice. In the documentary Harry Belafonte Sing Your Song, he contemplated his life of accomplishment and the work that lay ahead.
I try to envision playing out the rest of my life almost exclusively devoted to reflection. But there's just too much in the world to be done. My social activism, things that I believed in politically, and although I took a lot of heat for what I did then, I'm taking heat again for some of the things I say and do, but if history is any measure, then I probably wind up on the right side of the equation.
He will be missed. You know, Harry Belafonte meant so many things to so many people. He lived so many lives, had so many roles, was important in so many historical events. It's almost impossible. No, it is impossible to sum up his significance in any short fashion. So we're going to do the best that we can tonight to talk about who Harry Belafonte was and what he meant to so many people. Joining me now to do that is Carmen Perez Jordan. She is the CEO and president of Gathering for Justice, a nonprofit founded by Mr. Belafonte in 2005. Carmen, my friend, it's so good to see you. First of all, as someone who worked with Mr. Belafonte, who shared space with him, not just emotionally and psychologically, but y'all shared an office. How are you holding up? How's everyone doing?
You know, we're doing the best that we can. I know that, the family, Pam, sending her lots of love, the fact that she was able to hold his hand while he transitioned. But all of us are doing the best that we can. We're going to continue to do this work to keep his legacy alive. But it has been challenging. There have been moments of tears, but I've connected with some of our friends, Tamika Mallory and Linda Sarsour, and, Linda and Tamika were like, just be really proud. And so that's what I'm trying to hold and honor him, continue to honor him, even as he's transitioned. One of the things that I always wanted to do was to make Mr. Belafonte proud. I've been with him for 20 years. I started as a young person in the movement, building the Gathering for Justice. And, one of the promises that I made was that I would help him live out the rest of his life and work with him. And so I've done that. I just didn't realize that I would only get 20 years with him, but I'm grateful, and I'm going to honor him and do the work.
Doing the work, that's what Mr. Belafonte, that's what he lived to do. And when we say the work, we're talking about justice, and that played out in lots of different ways. I want to start by kind of talking about who Harry Belafonte was at the beginning of his career. Many of us know him and grew up with him as a civil rights icon, as a hero for human rights and international fights for justice. But there's a moment where Harry Belafonte was just the biggest star in the world, where he had the biggest song, and he was a big pop culture figure. And he could have done what most pop culture figures do. He could have just been really famous. He could have just been basking in celebrity. He could have been in all the parties and all the videos. He made a different choice.
He did. I think one of the things that I'm really grateful for in regards to Mr. Belafonte is his activism, but also leveraging his celebrity platform to bring awareness to the issues that were happening on the ground. He was a close confidant and friend to Dr. Martin Luther King, and he mentored me in strategy and organizing methodologies of the civil rights movement, as well as the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. He spoke often about his mentor, Paul Robeson, who was blacklisted for speaking up about racial inequality. And, Paul Robeson told a young Belafonte, if you get them to sing your song, they'll want to know who you are. And that encounter encouraged him to leverage his talent in service of human rights and racial justice. And Mr. Belafonte understood the assignment and frequently says, whatever gift you have, bring that to the cause, encouraging so many of us to think creatively about our unique skills and how we may serve the movement. I think, in his successful career in music and film, it gave him special access to high-profile spaces, and he consistently leveraged that to benefit the movement, putting Dr. King on The Tonight Show in 1968, putting Dr. King and SNCC in front of presidents, to telling Governor Cuomo to talk to Justice League NYC while we were organizing during the 2014 protests following the death of Eric Garner. And he taught us about the inside-outside game, right? Really leveraging the relationships with government and those on the outside to strategically identify achievable demands. He collaborated. This is one of my favorite stories. Is he collaborated with his friend and ally Eleanor Roosevelt to achieve strategies for change. One of the things that he did with her was that they worked together on a program that brought an airplane full of Kenyan students to the U.S. colleges, and one of them being Barack Sr., the father of our future U.S. president. So, for me, I'm grateful for all those teachings. I remember there were times when the movement had conflict, and I would sit with him and ask him a question, and it would take him 3 hours to answer and give me a historical analysis. And he would often say, those who are working towards the liberation of our people are subject to friendship and support. Those who are being divisive are playing the enemy's game. And so we always had something to give you. He had a strategy. He was a forward thinker. And again, to sit at his feet for 20 years and to run his organization and share space in an office, we also experienced a lot of joy, not just conversations around movement, but also music about young people. I was able to bring people like Philip Agnew from the Dream Defenders and 1199 Young Workers and Justice League members to meet with Mr. B. He was connected to the younger generation, and many of us are feeling this responsibility to continue his legacy and continue the work.
Absolutely. I mean, you just gave such an analysis. You went from, you're talking about Paul Robeson and Eleanor Roosevelt to Martin Luther King up to, 2014 elections up till today. I mean, that is a full life. That's a history book filled with struggle and wisdom and work and courage and generosity. And that's why Harry Belafonte meant so much to us. It means so much to us. Carmen, hang out there. We want to talk more about him on the other side of the break. Everybody stay right here tonight on The Grill. We're talking about the life and the legacy of the late, great Harry Belafonte. Welcome back to The Griot. We've been talking about the life and the legacy of actor, activist, cultural icon, you name it, he was it, Mr. Harry Belafonte. Belafonte was dubbed the King of Calypso after his 1956 hit, the Banana Boat song, Deo. He then became a movie star after acting in the film version of the Broadway musical Carmen Jones. But one of Belafonte's biggest contributions took place off stage. He was an ardent activist in the civil rights movement. He was a close friend of the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. He also led a campaign against apartheid in South Africa, and he was a close friend of famed political prisoner and former president of South Africa, Nelson Mandela. But his work didn't stop there. I want to bring my guest back in. Her name is Carmen Perez Jordan. She's the CEO and president of Gathering for Justice. Carmen, one of the things that I see today is there are artists, celebrities in general, who are often looked to for leadership, and they don't have the chops for it. They don't have the political training for it. They're famous and have the platform, but don't have the message. I also see activists who have the message, but nobody knows, and they're trying to fight to get to the front of the line. One of the things that I see with Mr. Belafonte's tradition, and Harry Belafonte in particular, is that he had the platform, he had the eyeballs of the people, but he also knew when to lean on others. He helped fund the March on Washington. He helped support Martin Luther King Jr., but he didn't try to take his place. How much did he talk to you about the importance of kind of knowing your role in the movement and when to use your money, when to use your name, when to use your fame, when to use your voice, how to decide among those things?
One of the things that Mr. Belafonte always talked about was there's a lane for you in the movement for equity and racial justice, right? And he often shared stories about how he single-handedly funded the civil rights movement so that Dr. King and SNCC and all those that were leading in the 1960s could continue that work. And I think one of the things that we know, right, is the fact that although there are artivists out there, people who are activists and artists, a lot of individuals do want to share both spaces. But there are individuals like Mr. B that do contact myself and others that are on the field doing the work so that they could support us. But, Mr. B was unique. Mr. B also faced a very different time. Artist, he was the first person to sell over 1 million records. He was somebody who leveraged his platform to talk about these difficult issues, because when he was selling out concerts in Las Vegas and his name was on the marquee, he was still facing the injustice of not being able to sleep in the hotels that white artists were able to sleep in. And so this was real to Mr. B. It was personal. I don't think a lot of other artists are facing what Mr. B was facing during that time. And so, for me, I, hope that people learn from Mr. Belafonte the sacrifices that he made, although he will argue they weren't sacrifices, they were his responsibility. And I hope that they pick something up and continue to support those of us that are doing the work on the ground. And Mr. Belafonte met with artists to talk about their role. He met with activists to talk about our role. And he often wanted us to collaborate with one another. It's the reason why we were originally called The Gathering, because we gathered for justice. That was something that he felt. He was a convener. He was somebody that brought people together. And one of the things that I know I was able to do for him was to bring young people to him to learn at his feet as well.
Wow. And that's what it means to continue a tradition. He sat at the feet of the great Paul Robeson, and so many of us sat at his feet. I remember when we were in Atlanta, maybe it was 2016, I believe, at the Many Rivers Festival. And it was a kind of retirement ceremony of sorts. And people were there to talk justice and struggle and freedom. And I remember seeing Danny Glover, and I remember seeing Jesse Williams. Those are the two people who stood out to me, who were talking about how much Harry Belafonte meant to them and how much he informed their career choices to be artists, specifically actors, who also spoke truth to power. Let me ask you, actually, did Mr. Belafonte feel that the next generation of artists were doing enough? You know, there's always the Jesse Williams and the Danny Glovers, but did he feel like in general that generation was doing enough?
I think that's a great question. I feel like, you know, he often asked them to do more. He often asked for artists to give more to the movement. And I think there are artists that are doing a lot for the movement that aren't necessarily advertising it, right? And one of the things that I think often about is Mr. Belafonte and also who are the new Harry Belafontes. But what I understand now, even in this transition that we're all going through, is the fact that there will be no one like a Mr. B. There will be no one who, you know, gives up the comfort of everything to provide for a whole family like he did for Dr. King and his family. The fact that even at 80, 90 years old, he felt compelled to continue to work with young people. At 96 years old, Mr. B, almost at 100 years, looked back at his life, and the question for him was that time wasted? And what I know is that it wasn't. And it's now all our responsibility, those that he mentored, those who he passed the baton to, those who took counsel with him, to continue his legacy and to continue the work that he started, because there is still so much for us to do and to continue on. And I will say, you know, for me, as somebody who's been in this space, who got to meet people like C.T. Vivian and or Representative John Lewis and so many of our elders that are no longer with us, is that we need to honor those that are, and we need to really find our lane in this movement and build a collaborative movement. Oftentimes, the simplest thing can get in the way. And Mr. B was, again, the person that said, okay, what gift do you have? Bring that to the movement. I've showed up for you. Now it's your responsibility to show up for the younger generation. And so, again, I think that folks can do more. I think that individuals are starting their own foundations, but there are a lot of organizations like the Gathering for Justice Until Freedom and others, the Dream Defenders, that are doing wonderful work. Connect with us, learn from us, so that we could also learn from you.
The last time I saw Mr. Belafonte, we were in New York, and he said, "Mark, it's so good to see you. Except last time, you were younger and more handsome." Like he always had like a joke. He was funny and he was kind, and I think some people think when you struggle for justice for a living, you also don't have a sense of humor. What are some other things about him that people would be surprised to know, or that you take treasure in knowing?
There's so many, Mark. I was just reminiscing about when we'd come into the office on Fridays. At the end of the day, we'd play music. As you can see, our office is filled with so many, you know, music awards, and he would play this sound from Africa, and he would make noise with his mouth, like, you know, and then I would play my hip hop, and there we'd have like this battle. People didn't know that about Mr. B. He was so funny. He loved cracking jokes. There was a moment in the office where he had asked his assistant to pull out the peanut butter and jelly and bread, and he ended up making me a sandwich. He was always taking care of us. He created an environment that felt like a living room, that felt like home, because so many of us were away from home doing this work, you know, on the front lines. There are so many moments, again, with Mr. B. He was just a funny guy. He knew how to make you feel like the most important person in the room, right? Even if he said something that was probably not of your liking, but he made you feel important.
That's a gift. I mean, he was a gift. That was a gift. And the fact that you could tell people that Harry Belafonte made you a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, you could brag about that forever. Carmen, thank you for the work you're doing. Thank you for sharing your story with us. Thank you for working with Mr. Belafonte and building this organization is something that means so much for so many people around the world. We love you. We're grateful for you. And we're honored to say that you stand in the tradition of Mr. Harry Belafonte. Everybody stay right here because next up, I was there for one of Mr. Belafonte's last public performances, and the special way he closed out that show we want to share with you. Stay right here. We'll tell you all about it. Welcome back to The Griot. We have been honoring the life and legacy of Harry Belafonte, and I want to share a moment that I was blessed to witness firsthand. It was at the Many Rivers to Cross Festival held in Atlanta in the fall of 2016. The festival was started by Mr. B himself through his organization, sankofa.org. The two-day festival combined music and social activism. It was a celebration, and everybody was there. Carmen, John Legend, Maxwell, Jesse Williams, Danny Glover, Sonia Sanchez, T.I. So many people were there, all on the word and from the call of Mr. Harry Belafonte. And, of course, Mr. B was there himself, being showered with all the love that he deserved as we gathered at his feet to soak in his wisdom. And on that final day, after several performances, Mr. Belafonte took the stage to perform Those Three Are On My Mind. That song is about the 1964 murders of 3 Mississippi civil rights workers. It was his first performance in over a decade since he'd had a stroke. Now, he was 89 at the time, and he sang that song. And once he was finished singing, he reminded everybody that there was a significance, there was an importance, a necessity of black people coming together in solidarity and organizing for change. He said, "We have people running for office who threaten us with racial dissension, anger, and rage. This is a small way for us to non-violently say, we will not let this go any further." So many people who took the stage that night paid homage to the great Mr. Harry Belafonte. What a night. What a man. He will surely be missed. All right, family, we have reached the end of the show, but before I let you go, I want to say a final word about Harry Belafonte. Harry Belafonte was extraordinary for all the reasons that we mentioned yesterday and today on the show, but he did something that we can all do. He was a door opener. He was a Trojan horse. Harry Belafonte was able to get into the room because he was rich and famous, because he was handsome, because he was an A-list actor, and he was a star singer, and in a color-struck world, he was light-skinned. He had all the things that people like to look to. But when he got in the room, it wasn't just him in there. He was representing for those 4 girls who were killed in Birmingham. He was representing for our grandmamas and great-great-grandmamas who couldn't sit at the lunch counter. He was representing for the factory worker, for the person suffering under apartheid South Africa, for the person being bombed in the Middle East or in Africa. He was speaking out for the vulnerable and for the least of these. That's something that we can all do. Whether it's at our job, whether it's in our religious traditions, whether it's with our friends who are powerful, whatever the space is, we got to get in there and we got to open up space and hold space for the most vulnerable people in our society. Those who have been given the most have the most responsibility. Harry Belafonte taught that. He lived that in his activism, in his organizing, in his institution building, and in his mentoring. He loved us deeply, and he always showed up for us, but he also always allowed us to show up for ourselves.